Hey everyone, I'm going to be covering a quick demonstration on game objects. Now, as I covered in the blog post, a game object is conceptually very similar to a prefab. You take your entity, you can attach child objects, components to it, and can save it into a template of sorts that you can easily respawn over and over again, but also has the advantage of script hooks, so that even if you have separate game objects with similar construction, such as a player object, which has its mesh, collisions, your movements, all that, and you can still have an AI and a player because you can have the gameplay logic hook back differently based on the game object, even if they're constructed similarly. So to start, let's go ahead, crack open the editor, and make a quick example. So we spawn our entity, and we'll just make it act like a simple static shape. Give it a placeholder model. And bounds for the collisions. So we have our super simple object, so we can just go in here, and we will put this in our test module. And it has been converted. As you can see here, we have changed the class, so the namespace of our object, to the game object that we just created, which is how the script hooks happen. And if we open our asset browser, we can see we have this now. The spawning doesn't hook through the asset browser yet. That is still work in progress, but we can go over here. As you can see, we have a copy. Can start set up the exact same way as the one we just made. However, unlike prefabs, you can easily go in and take an instance of a game object and modify it if you need to. So in this case, we can go in here and we can, say, change it to our player box. And from here you could save that as a new game object or whatever you need to do. But it enables you to set up a template base and then modify it as necessary, saving it out so you can have a static shape that's configured just the way you need it, and then tweak that from there without having to go through the tedious process of exploding it out, collapsing it back, and so on. So from there, we can get into a bit more of a built-out example. So we have the player object, which I touched on slightly in the prior video, but this thing is interesting because it is obviously a player object you can work with, and as you're watching it, obviously it is a third-person camera. The movement is relative to the third-person camera view, so if I were to hit left, he moves to the left. Even as I orbit around, same for front, back, left, right, he'll spin around. But to get more complicated behaviors, you also have where we can use the mouse wheel to reduce our speed. So I'm doing a sneak now, and back to full. If you hold right mouse, it goes into an aim mode, and you can see here that it behaves closer to a traditional shooter where I'm always oriented towards the camera. You can go into a first person mode, you can jump, and if you look at the component construction, you'll note that sure, we have our control, our collision, mesh, FPS controls, our camera stuff, animation, the player physics, the interaction functionality, and inventory and stuff. But if we were to go in there and edit our game object to crack open the associated script file, we can have a quick look at that, and we can see that we have our hookup for our components. We're setting up some basic parameters here, and then we get a whole bunch of callback actions that come from entities or the components that the entity owns. So you have move vector event, which is any directional move event. So when you do your move forward, your move backwards, left, right, that goes through the move class, which transits up to the server and gets a callback through this. So it's a very compartmentalized and direct way of doing inputs to action. And if we were to look through here, this is actually where we control how the player moves. There's the basic player physics component, but that mostly is for force, translating the collisions into movement, gravity, things like that. The actual input to action is all handled here in the script. Depending on whether we're aiming, we manipulate the orbiter component differently. If we do jumps, we do impulses, things like that. As you can see here, we have an on-collision event. This actually is called back through our collision component. So components call into their own script if it exists, and also into the owner entity if a script associates with that. So we can have customized collision behavior specifically for a unique game object, let alone any collision components that are attached. All entities, game objects, and components also have a common process tick update function. So any sort of time-sensitive stuff you need to do there will work. And then you have some server commands for talking to the first person, the mouse wheel scroll, and all of this is done in script. So the first-person view, the third-person orbital view, the directional move, the aiming action, how the jump functions, the mouse wheel business, move slower if I hold the control for crouching, even if there's no animation attached. All of that was done entirely through scripts outside of really core stuff like collisions being managed, the mesh being rendered, the deep level physics handling, all that's in the engine level, but all the actual gameplay bits like this are done 100% through script. And hopefully you can see when you do that, you combine being able to do script side components, roll them into a game object, and then further customize the game object with gameplay scripts. You can see how you can do really fast turnaround on work. And to highlight that even further, if we were to go in here to our script and do something like let's just modify that. Save. And then do a refresh, which re-executes the asset. You can see we suddenly move a lot faster. We didn't have to close anything out, we didn't have to reload. It's not like how you had to do it before, where you would, want to edit your main speed or tweak how the third-person camera behaves, where you would have to try it, not like it, close the game, open the source code, edit the source code, recompile, reopen the game, decide you still hate it, and rinse repeat until you're happy. You never even have to shut off the game. You can do it through live script editing and modification, templatizing, making components, doing game object scripts, and you can do it all in an incredibly fast feedback loop, allowing you to get stuff done and just focus on game dev. So, hopefully that explains what game objects are, how they get used. Obviously it's not a very in-depth on how everything works, but this is kind of a top-level look, so hopefully that explains it, and we'll go into more details and the planned future functionality at a later time.